We're going to wrap up this last half hour with an update on the beer industry with a 25-year veteran of policy and political work. He now heads the Beer Institute, the national trade association that represents America's brewers, also importers of beer, supply chain partners. According to their website, adds up to a $328 billion industry supporting more than 2.1 million American jobs. For more on the pandemic and post-pandemic worlds of the beer industry, let's bring in Jim McGreevy, President and Chief Executive Officer of the Beer Institute. He's with us on the phone in New Jersey. Jim, nice to have you here today. How are you? And talk to me a little bit about kind of where you guys were and your industry members 1 year ago at the start of the pandemic.
Oh, boy, Carol. Well, first of all, thanks for having me. I really appreciate it. Where we were a year ago is probably where so many other Americans were a year ago personally and in their jobs, really trying to figure out as of March 13th and around there where our industry would be going. Thankfully, the federal government made the production and distribution of beer essential as part of the grocery system. So we were able to keep our breweries and many of our folks employed in the making and distribution of beer. Obviously, with the bars and restaurants closed for months on end, particularly at the beginning of the pandemic, we saw so many of those jobs lost, nearly 570,000, as a matter of fact, throughout the U.S., jobs supported by the beer industry. But the Beer Serves America report really it tells the story of a very resilient industry and one that's coming back, we hope, as America comes back. So we're very pleased with some of this data from our biennial report.
Well, it's interesting, local beverage center where we pick up like our cases of water and, whatever else, juices and stuff. But I said to them how, I hadn't seen them in about a year. And I said, how are you guys? And they said it was really hard because like 90% of their business was supplying all of the local restaurants in the community. And that was just shut down. Tell us about your members, because we think about, those of us who go to the supermarket, right? Or, to pick up something, but it's the restaurants and the hospitality industry that your members play such a big role on. How hard hit were they?
Oh, they were very hard hit, not just from the hundreds of thousands of employees that either lost their jobs on a permanent or temporary basis, but we saw nearly $20 billion in decline in retail beer sales. You think back to that mid-March period of 2020, the March Madness was just getting rolling with the conference tournaments leading to the NCAA tournament. St. Patrick's Day, we loaded in a lot of beer in the bars and restaurants throughout the country for St. Patrick's Day. So many of these holidays, then moving into the summer with Memorial Day, 4th of July. The bars and restaurants in this country were just so hard hit. You had I think you did an interview with John Taffer from Bar Rescue last month, and he said that he's starting to see them coming back, though, and that's what the data shows that we're seeing. We're getting near the end of this COVID period, thankfully, and I think we're starting to see these bars and restaurants crowded. I can tell you down here at the Jersey Shore, we saw lines out the door and down the block to get into some of the bars and restaurants at the Jersey Shore just this past weekend, when it was torrential rain outside with folks standing outside it with garbage bags and umbrellas just trying to get in and gather together. And a lot of that gathering is done around a beer. So we're very hopeful for the recovery of the bars and restaurants. It's so important to our country, so important to beer. During the COVID period, we saw significant spoilage of food and beverage, and beer is perishable.
Right.
Nearly $900 million dollars worth of beer that was just perishable, and that just really hurts the industry and hurts the bars and restaurants.
That's amazing. That's a big number. Hey, in terms of demand, ultimately, though, did it pick up substantially over the past year? Just got about 30 seconds. We'll do some news and then we'll come back.
Well, I'll just tell you one thing John said. The more beer was sold last month in Las Vegas than ever before in the history of the city. So I think that goes to show you, hopefully, where we're going to go in the next few months.
All right. Interesting. John, Yeah, it was good to talk with him because to get some perspective on hospitality and how it plays into the restaurant industry, those small businesses that are largely the backbone of the economy. Jim, we're going to come back in just a moment. Jim McGreevy, he's going to stay with us, President and Chief Executive Officer of the Beer Institute. I want to talk to him a little bit about the industry, if they're able to access the workers they need to get back up and running and meet the greater demand, certainly as the U.S. economy opens. We'll talk to him about that, and also talk to him a little bit about corporate taxes, especially on that news and expectations from President Biden. Well, Jim McGreevy is still with us. He's President and Chief Executive Officer of the Beer Institute, still with us on the phone in New Jersey. The Beer Institute, the national trade association that represents America's brewers, beer importers, and supply chain partners. So really a great snapshot of what's going on in the industry. Hey, Jim, one thing I wanted to ask you, jobs. We get the monthly jobs report tomorrow. Your industry, are they having any troubles attracting workers, especially as the economy opens up and demand ramps up?
We don't see trouble attracting workers in our breweries and in the distribution business. Again, Carol, it goes back to the bars and restaurants, right?
Right.
Nearly 570,000 jobs lost on a temporary or permanent basis, and you hear lots of discussion around the difficulties of getting people back into those places. And I think we really need to support the recovery by getting those folks back to work. And I think we're seeing that. I mean, our sense is from some of the data we're seeing that the food service in what we call the on-premise, the bars, restaurants, taverns, are starting to come back to pre-pandemic levels. I think we're going to get there, but certainly you do hear from a lot of different corners the discussion around the difficulty in getting some workers. And I think we're certainly seeing that in the bars and restaurants right now.
But we're not at pre-pandemic levels for the industry yet.
No, but, I think we're going to have a big summer for all Americans, and I think for the hospitality industry, and I think for the beer industry. So I'm very hopeful. You just see the economic impact of beer through our Beer Serves America report. 1.6% of U.S. GDP comes from our industry. 2 million Americans owe their livelihoods in one way or another to the production, distribution, and sale of beer. We're coming out of a period where folks were cooped up. They want out, and I think they're going to we're already seeing them sort of hitting the bars and restaurants in this country in a big way, and I think that's only going to grow.
I have to say, some of our listeners and followers on YouTube, I think hearing that you said we're going to have a strong summer, saying, well, I'll drink to that. So responding as the world reopens. Hey, listen, one thing I'm curious about, President Biden said to be offering up to create a tax floor 15% down from his earlier proposal to lift the corporate tax rate from 21 to 28%. So essentially unwinding the tax cuts that the GOP adopted back in 2017. That's what he initially was looking to do. Now it looks like he's backing off of that potentially. I'm assuming your members are in favor of lower rather than higher corporate taxes.
Well, we saw the power of tax relief in our own industry. We are one of the most taxed industries and regulated industries in the country, but we did receive relief from the excise tax that beer pays in 2020 and 2019, excuse me. And we saw the power of that for our industry. So I think it's great to see seemingly Republicans and Democrats coming together, inching closer towards one another on some kind of deal here on infrastructure, which I think will only help support the recovery. Excise tax is a tax that we pay that others do not, but the total taxes paid we see in our Beer Serves America report from beer is $55 billion. So we certainly want to see low taxes, but we know in our industry the power of tax relief just in recent years. It's been very helpful to us. So
what specifically, what happens when there's low taxes? What happens to that money? Because we often talk about it with, publicly held companies that you get a tax break. It's not necessarily higher wages or investment in the business. It's often buybacks. So I'm just curious, what happens when there's lower taxes in your industry? What specifically do you see happen?
Yeah, Carol, in 1976, there were 51 breweries left in this country. Today, there are over 8,000. And I can tell you, when we received the excise tax relief over the last few years that we've received, I talked to brewers across the country, large brewers, small brewers, all sort of talking about the same thing, using that tax relief to hire more workers, to improve their physical plants, their breweries, their tap rooms, their facilities, finding more ways to distribute their beer, innovating more and more. So to me, we see this, we are an industry that has experienced this over the last few years. Low taxes drives innovation, it drives jobs, and it drives an industry.
Hey, so in terms of innovation, what are some of the kind of interesting, innovative trends that are happening within the beer industry? You know, we were talking on our planning call, and I was thinking about cannabis and beer, and the political environment seems to be opening up in a big way, certainly when it comes to cannabis, more generally speaking. What are the interesting trends, Jim, that are happening right now?
Beer is always innovating, Carol. You know, a few decades ago, light beer was an innovation of its time. Then we saw the rise of the craft movement and bringing back some of the styles that had fallen off the radar screen for a while, particularly IPAs. Today, you see ready-to-drink beverages in so many different ways. The hard seltzer phenomenon of the last 4 years, preceded by the hard soda movement of a few summers ago. That's the great thing about beer. We are always innovating. We want to be where the consumer is. And the consumer right now is looking for more flavor, but also very mindful of health and wellness, calories and other things. So these hard seltzers, the ready-to-drink beverages are really becoming a bigger and bigger part of our industry. Many of them are malt-based. They're made in a brewery. They're made by brewers. That's the kind of innovation you see, and you hear so much about these different hard seltzer brands now. But there's always something new in beer. Beer is an incredibly dynamic industry.
Just got about 20, 25 seconds here. When you talk to your members, the outlook, the economic market outlook, how does it look for the next 6 months to 12 months?
Well, as I said, I think we're hoping for a big summer for every American and for beer in particular. We want to grow those 2 million jobs supported by the beer industry. We want to grow that $332 billion economic input that we have. So, I think that there's always things that can be improved upon. But I think the opportunities for beer are great. I think the opportunities for our country are great coming out of this pandemic period. So I'm very hopeful.
All right. Well, great to check in with you. I really appreciate it. Jim McGreevy, he's President and Chief Executive Officer at the Beer Institute, joining us on the phone from New Jersey. Some optimism, certainly, for his industry. All right.